Good morning, everyone, and welcome. This is Adrienne Luckenbacher, one of your moderators today for the webinar series. Today, we're joined by Tom Moore, and today is Advancing Recovery Through Mindfulness. We want to welcome everyone today. Today is actually our 11th presenter of our series, which is taking place all during September, which is National Recovery Month. Tom is our 11th presenter today. He's rejoining us. He was with us earlier in the month. And just to remind everyone, we have 18 total presentations, and our series actually wraps up on the 30th of September, where we have a State of the County panel discussion, and you can find all that information on our website, sccmh.org. And as always, I want to welcome everyone to the Opioid and Other Drugs virtual series presented by St. Clair County Community Mental Health in partnership with the Community Services Coordinating Body. And this webinar series is made possible by a grant which is awarded by SAMHSA to us, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. We want to share always, just like we've done all 11 other times, tips, housekeeping things. I'll go through it because many of you have heard it over and over again. So I'll go through it quickly, although important details. Just to remind everyone, today's session is being recorded. We really like to encourage everyone to use the chat button and the chat feature on your screen, which can be found in the lower corner. The chat feature will allow you to ask questions, share resources, comments, anything that you can share would be appreciated. If time allows with Tom, he is more than welcome to answer questions at the end. So if time allows, we're going to go ahead and do questions. We may not get to all of them, but we will certainly try our best. Also, Tom has graciously offered all of his contact information so that if there are questions or anything else at the end of the webinar that we don't get to, he encourages everyone to reach out to him and ask those questions for him. A few housekeeping bits for continuing education credits. Make sure when you signed into the series, you please use your full first name and full last name. It's important for us to keep track for continuing education credits. If you haven't had a chance to do that, you can go ahead and sign back out and sign back in. You really need to be logged on for the entire duration of the webinar if you are applying for any kind of continuing education credits. And if any time you get kicked out or lose connectivity, just go ahead and log back in. If you have to do that several times, that's okay because we're able to keep track of it on our end. In order to get the continuing education credits, folks do need to complete a short quiz and survey that were sent out to you in an email with the confirmation of the link today. If you don't have it, if you can't find it, you can go ahead and go to the page where you registered. And under the speaker for today, it will show the quiz and the survey, and you can click there and get to it through there as well too. With the quiz and survey, just a reminder, those have to be done within 7 days of today's presentation in order to get the continuing education credits. There's an in and out code for every presentation that we do, and today's in code is MIND, all capitals, M-I-N-D. And again, it's MIND, M-I-N-D. We'll also put it up on the chat feature if you didn't catch it at the beginning. So today and this morning, we would like to welcome back Tom Moore. Tom Moore has presented for us already during this series, and we'd like to welcome him back. So I'd like to share a little bit about Tom. Tom's a licensed social worker, limited licensed psychologist, certified advanced addictions counselor, and a certified clinical supervisor. He's a person with lived experience and has been in the substance use disorder field for over 42 years. After a career including direct clinical service, clinical supervision, chief quality officer, adjunct professor, and director of education and training, his current endeavors include mentoring and preparing young recovery coaches and clinicians, working with male residents in treatment facilities, and presenting webinars and distance learning opportunities and webinars like today. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn the screen over to Tom.
Thank you. Well, here we are this morning, folks, and we're going to have a chance to both learn some things about mindfulness and also to apply these directly to each one of our lives. So here are our objectives for this morning: to identify how mindfulness is appropriate for the treatment of substance use disorders, to state which client types are appropriate for mindfulness, and to personally experience at least 2 mindfulness exercises. We actually have 3 scheduled. So we'll see if we have time to do all three. And we're going to start in with the first objective right now, to identify how mindfulness is appropriate for the treatment of substance use disorders. So to prepare for that, one of the things is, in most treatment programs who use 12-step approaches, and I'm by no means saying 12-step approaches are the only approaches. There are many roads to recovery. That spirituality has always been considered part of that. I know Smart Recovery, and there's some other programs that don't use that. I'll allude to that just a little later. So thinking about this in a number of ways, addiction represents a physical solution to emotional or spiritual problems. From the big book of AA, we have not only been mentally and physically ill, we've been spiritually sick. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. Also from the big book, what we really have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. Pat Carnes, who some of you may be familiar with, who did all the work in sexual compulsivity in the 1980s, and who founded Pine Grove recovery program in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, that was specifically for sexual compulsivity. In his book, Trapped in the Shadow of the Net, he talked about it at the very end of it, and I had to reread it about a half dozen times, that when someone is in active addiction, that represents the closest to a mystical experience that many people can attain. And he was not saying that was a preferable mystical experience, but it was a step towards being able to grasp a mystical experience of some type. There have been some other ways to look at that in terms of going all the way back to 1963, seeing again substance use disorders being misguided and futile, egotistical behavior to satisfy deep spiritual needs. Ernest Kurtz, who wrote his doctorate at Harvard on the history of AA, said a misrepresentation of the spiritual need through godlike experiences. Carl Jung, 1961, equivalent on a low level of the spiritual thirst of our being for wholeness, the union with God. And Andrew Weil, who wrote one of the early books on substance use disorders called Natural Mind, said that we have an innate need to alter our consciousness. And he talked about kids being on the merry-go-round and going faster and faster and faster until they got dizzy, doing the monkey bars and hanging upside down. In my neighborhood, it was taking 10 deep breaths and holding the 10th one and having some big lug squeeze you from behind until you passed out. So talked about how hardwired that is into our human consciousness. Rami Shapiro, who's a very impressive author, who's written a book called Recovery, the Sacred Art, and he's a rabbi who is deeply schooled in both Eastern traditions and Christianity, says the problem is we want to be other than who we are. To be other than who we are, we have to get control over who we are so we can change who we are. But this can't be done. After all, who would do it? The you that seeks control is the one that really needs controlling. The effort to control is a madness all its own, and we treat it with our addictions. If we didn't want to be other than who we are, we wouldn't have a problem. We wouldn't be addicts. The more you try to be other than who you are, the more just like you become. So I'm also very impressed with Father Thomas Keating, who has written a book. I'm looking at the title of it here, Divine Therapy and Addiction, which was a transcript of him being interviewed by an AA member with over 30 years of sobriety. And what he talks about is he talks about the way that we are emotionally and psychologically wounded in our childhood. Some of you may remember that there was a Jungian analyst who wrote a book years ago, Alice Miller, that was called Thou Shalt Not Be Aware. And she said the goal of parents was to break a child's will. And the earlier you break it, the easier it is for them to forget that they ever had a will to begin with. And so that deep wounding that we really want, our basic need is to be happy. And we want to fulfill our instinctual need to be happy. But those things are based on the third bullet down: survival and security, affection, esteem, and approval, and power and control. And what happens is that we have these hardwired emotional programs to get us there, but the hardwired emotional programs that we're using, in fact, don't get us there. They just get us into more suffering in that regard. And that we have a tendency to over-identify with family, community, village, tribe, nation, religion, language, culture, ethnicity, race, and gender. And maybe we want to add political party to that as well. And that the more that we over-identify with those things, the more we forget our common humanity and our need to belong basically to the larger realm of civilization. So Jack Kornfield, who is one of the mindfulness teachers, said in popular Western culture, we're taught the way to achieve happiness is to change our external environment to fit our wishes. But the strategy doesn't work. In every life, pleasure and pain, gain and loss, praise and blame keep showing up no matter how hard we struggle to have only pleasure, gain, and praise. More than anything else, the way we experience life is created by particular states of mind with which we meet it. So I was puzzled in being a person again with lived experience that at one point I was reading in the big book and I came across this passage. And the passage said, though our decision was a vital and crucial step, it could have little permanent effect and unless at least once followed by a strenuous effort to face and to be rid of the things in ourselves which had been blocking us. Our liquor was but a symptom, so we had to get down to causes and conditions. And my mind said, well, I thought that the liquor was the problem. It says here that the substance was only a symptom. What was the cause? What was the condition if it was not the substance itself? So here's an example from one of the books on mindfulness. It gives kind of a case study. Sam's recovery from addiction had involved attending 12-step meetings. One evening after a meeting, he felt agitated, impulsive, and on the verge of relapsing. Every fiber in his body wanted to act out to phone his dealer to score a hit. He phoned his 12-step program sponsor, who agreed to meet him on the beach for a walk. While Sam waited for his sponsor, he walked on the beach. As he walked, he became acutely aware of the intensity of his agitation, how every fiber in his body wanted oblivion. The compulsion gripped him like a vice. He experienced it as a powerful impulse to act out. This was the first of many instances in which Sam closely observed his mind and body states without acting them out, each time with greater clarity. Over time, he came to see them as waves he could anticipate in surf. Sam's experience is an extreme example of a common experience, namely the arising and falling away of cravings. And some of you may know urge surfing, which comes out of the mindfulness tradition. We're not going to do that one today. I'll be doing that next week at the Substance Use Disorder Conference. But urge surfing, which is exactly that. And one of the things most people don't realize is that cravings will go away on their own, but they don't know that because they've usually never waited it out. They've always used instead. So what we're going to do next is we're going to do our first mindfulness activity. This is going to take a couple of minutes, and turn your volume up so you can make sure and hear it. I have the volume on this end turned up as loudly as possible. This is being aware of body sensations, moods, feelings, thoughts, gathering attention, connecting awareness and sensations of breathing, and expanding awareness to include the sense of body as a whole. So here we go with our three-step breathing exercise.
Three-step breathing space. Just taking a moment to focus on your breathing and allowing it to naturally rise and fall. Just being particularly aware of how you don't have to tell it to do this. Just taking a moment to let your breathing find its natural rhythm. Becoming more aware of how things are in this moment by adopting a comfortable and dignified posture. And if possible, closing your eyes and allowing your awareness to focus on your inner experience acknowledging that experience, and gently asking yourself, what body sensations are here right now? As I kind of scan through my body from bottom to top or top to bottom, what body sensations are here right now? What moods and feelings are here? What do I most notice in terms of my energy level, my mood, my feelings? And then just being aware of what thoughts are occurring within your mind. Then redirecting your attention to focus on physical sensations associated with your body. Returning the focus to your breath, wherever you feel it most vividly. Tuning into these sensations for the full duration of your in-breath and the full duration of your out-breath. Just breathing in that you are calm, breathing out in the present moment, breathing in that you are peaceful, breathing out safe in the present moment. And now just expanding your field of awareness around your breath so that it includes a sense of your body as a whole, your posture, your facial expression, the totality of you, and that space where there is you, and then there is the rest of awareness, and that space that is somehow the edge or the boundary between those two. And as best you can, just bringing this wider awareness to the next moments of your day. And then congratulating yourself for whatever level you were able to participate and notice this, and letting your awareness return to this time and this place, refreshed, revitalized, relaxed.
Okay, so one of the things I wanted to say here, I meant to say earlier, was realize when we do mindfulness with folks in the process of recovery or remission, as I tend to call it, that one of the things that we look at is that stress often triggers folks to return to use. I think another significant component is unresolved trauma, and to understand that mindfulness can accomplish both of those things for folks. Another thing to think about is a vision quest, which has been given lots of labels. If we go back and look at it in the traditional sense in terms of indigenous people, what we really know is that years ago, the Anishinaabe people, the Native Americans who inhabited our lands, participated in vision quest. And part of that was to try to find new meaning and purpose to their life. That's one of the reasons I use the term remission rather than recovery. That remission has a medical component, which means that the condition is no longer active, like cancer being in remission for someone. And then that the idea is that we need to find a new meaning and purpose in our lives, a remission in that regard. So here's an example of how that happened in a prison in Alabama. This is Donaldson Max Security Correctional Facility they decided to do Vipassana training, which was a meditative training for folks, and that this was based on prior training that had been done in India with over 1,000 individuals. They got 37 inmates to volunteer for it. Part of it was that they were going to do this in the gymnasium. They were going to set up separate like dormitory facilities and have meals prepared. So some of the inmates decided to do it just so they could get out of their cells, because most of them were lifers and they had been in their cells, 10, 12, 15 hours a day for maybe 15 years. They did this Vipassana retreat. It was 10 days consecutive, 10 hours of meditation, 10 hours of Vipassana. And when they weren't in Vipassana, they were in complete silence. And what happened was these individuals, many of whom had significant alcohol and drug problems, said by about the third or fourth day, they were confronting the demons they had run from their entire life. But in silence for 10 hours, they had nowhere to go except to deal with what they had been trying to avoid from the very beginning. Grady Bankhead, one of the participants, said it was tougher than his 8 years on death row. Okay, so now we're going to come to our second objective. We're going to look about what client types are appropriate for mindfulness. And here's some examples. Individuals who are very rigid psychologically, who tend to perceive the world in extremes. Everything's right, everything's wrong. People who tend to avoid their internal experience, as I was just giving the example of with the Donaldson prison. People who tend to push away what's going on the inside, that when they get their attention fixed on something like craving or solving a need or solving an urge, that they have difficulty in focusing on anything else, that they're very attached to their conceptual self, their ego, their story, their understanding of themselves in a very literal way, that they tend to fuse with their thinking, with things that are going on, and think that, again, what's going on is the entirety of what could be happening in their lives at that point, that those bottom line values, those innate values, that genuine self, there has been a disruption to that, and that they are in the two extremes again, the dichotomous poles of inaction or impulsivity, or flipping back and forth between the two. I think what we'll realize is that covers probably the majority of people that we work with in our professional duties. So that understand that there are various ways of being and knowing, and that one of those is about our attention, which sometimes is about our alertness, our instinctual need to be on guard, to be ready. Other times it's like, that kind of attention where how do we focus on what we're trying to do? How do we keep our mind from wandering in certain ways? Again, the mindfulness teachers say, and they're not talking about people in recovery now, they're just talking about human beings in general, is that they say the mind is like a drunken monkey, that's how undisciplined it is. Then we have the conceptual mind, the one that wants to put things into categories, into silos, categorize, label, determine, describe things. And then the experiential mind, which is the one that's more of the mindfulness kind of mind, which is being able to observe without judging, being able to be in the moment, being able to live in the breath, and then being able to respond skillfully out of that. So again, just some ways of looking at that mindfulness can help in terms of reframing the perspective and view for individuals, helping them to get to a place of investigative awareness, what is really going on here? And again, how have I learned to protect this? Like Father Thomas Keating said, what are those hardwired defense mechanisms I've put into place in order to protect myself? And then how do I get to simple knowing and awareness underneath of that, what I would consider to be everyone's birthright? What are the foundations of mindfulness? Well, 4: body, feelings, experience, and mental states. And we're going to take a few minutes to touch down into each one of those. So when we talk about the practice here, we're talking about specific elements that would be included in a mindfulness program, whether that's in an outpatient program, an intensive outpatient program, a residential program, ACT, no matter what it is, that you're teaching people body scan, how to be aware of their body through movement, sitting, walking, because a lot of people have the mistaken idea that mindfulness can only be practiced quietly in the dark, sitting in a lotus position. And actually mindfulness is often best practiced in walking and active kinds of things. If you talk to people who are long distance runners, they go into a state of mindfulness when they're doing long distance running, triathletes, etc. The feelings, looking at using a pleasant and unpleasant experiences calendar to track that, 3-step breathing, which we just did. The mental state, pleasant and unpleasant experiences calendar, thoughts and feelings exercises, seeing and hearing practices, 3-step breathing. So you see 3-step breathing listed all the way through here, which is one of the reasons we did it early. And then getting to that attention of experience, working with challenges and hindrances, having a person do certain experiments with you and outside of sessions to examine stress, depression, reactivity, and appreciation, joy, gratitude, and responsiveness. So what if in our services we could teach people to have greater levels of acceptance, compassion, forgiveness, and gratitude? What if we accomplished that and maybe nothing else? Because what we have to understand with acceptance is the brain tends to focus on the negative. The brain seems to have Velcro for negative things and Teflon for accomplishments and positive states. And that we have problems with impermanence, in that if something is pleasurable for us, we want it to last forever. If something is painful for us, we want to get out of it immediately. So we have problems with that whole impermanence, to understand that life keeps changing, things cease to exist, and that every single moment, everything is changing, even at the atomic and subatomic levels. One of the interesting things here is refuge recovery, which is the Buddhist path to recovering from addiction. Is I wonder sometimes when people are struggling with a 4-step inventory, what would happen if we move them to a first truth inventory instead, where the person begins to talk about the suffering they have experienced in association with their addictions, and that might start them on the path to a 4th step when they seem to be blocked in that way. So when you think about yourself with acceptance, do you find it easy to practice? Is it easier to practice for certain things and not others? And why is this such a simple concept, and how much significance does it involve? It's really the opposite of resignation and defeat. It's not passive. It helps us really examine life both in pain and imperfection and in beauty. That famous philosopher, old-time baseball player, Hall of Famer Yogi Berra said, "If the world were perfect, it wouldn't be." So how do we perceive things as positive and build that spiritual community? How do we think about a difficult neighbor offering the opportunity to address compassion, kindness, warm-heartedness, etc.? So that's acceptance. Then if we think about forgiveness, if we think about taking a teaspoon of salt in a glass of water is very salty, but if you pour it into a pond, it doesn't matter at all. So you need to expand your mind to turn it into a pond, rather than, again, holding it too tightly in that conceptual and cognitive self. Here's an example. Richard Moore, no relation to me, who was from Northern Ireland, was 10 years old on his way to school, and a soldier fired a rubber bullet and it hit him between the eyes. He fainted, gained consciousness at the hospital. He was blinded in one eye immediately and then lost sight in the other eye. He got married and had 2 daughters, And later in his life, he found the British soldier, shared his forgiveness, and they have become lifelong friends today. One example of doing that. That's a heavy lift, no doubt. How about Amy Beale, who was in South Africa, an American working there doing peace and justice work, and she was dragged from her vehicle by some protesters on the street and killed. They saw her, just thought that she was one of the white South Africans and killed her. Her parents eventually traveled from California to meet the men who killed her and to also meet their families. At the public reconciliation hearing, the parents stated, "We want to be part of the process of healing in South Africa. We're sure our daughter would support us in saying we want amnesty to be granted to the murderers." And then they established a financial foundation that now employs these men so they can have gainful employment. Another example of forgiveness, and we'll be coming back to this gentleman in a little while, is that Anthony Ray Hinton was imprisoned for 30 years in a 5 by 7 foot cell. He was allowed out once a day. 54 other prisoners were on death row with him and put to death, and he forgave all of those who placed him in jail. He said, "If I'm angry and unforgiving, they will have taken the rest of my life." So in terms of forgiveness, this comes about telling your story, either through journaling or sharing with a trusted friend, sponsor, etc. It's important when you do this that you avoid re-traumatizing yourself, and that sometimes when we have people tell their stories over and over and over again, they actually re-traumatize themselves with that. You know, one of the things we established 30 years ago in Kent County when we were working with a lot of trauma in our outpatient facility, substance use facility that was doing a lot of trauma work, is we had some community speak outs where people could actually come to microphones in auditoriums and share their stories. And we had facilitators there to make sure that if people had reactions that we processed that out with them afterwards. So maybe it helps sometimes to name the hurt and to write it as if it's a third person story, that it's about somebody else and not about you. And, you know, to notice what are your reactions there and what are the causes and reasons for those feelings. Again, is it possible then to forgive the person, to understand that maybe their behavior started with their own suffering? When we look at intergenerational trauma, we know that usually sometimes people who have been traumatized in their own lives re-traumatize other people. However, maybe the pain is too great. Maybe you can't do that, you know? So it's like, maybe if the whole thing of Gandhi's quote about an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind, that as we accept our shared humanity, maybe it's possible to release that right for revenge and to move towards healing. And then in renewing and releasing, following forgiveness, deciding whether you want contact with that person again, and the answer could be no. And if the trauma is significant and there's no going back, then if you do the releasing of that, then you can move on instead. So some questions here. Do you struggle with forgiveness? And where might you do that? Again, why does this carry such significance? This doesn't mean we forget. We remember so we can choose forgiveness over pain and forgiveness over hatred. That when we don't forget, actually we're tethered to that person or situation that harmed us. And that that's a form of re-traumatization. That what we really want is the release from hatred and anger and the lack of forgiveness. And that the lack of forgiveness actually compromises our immune system. So we're more susceptible to disease, to infection, to viruses. And that part of this is understanding we're not going to jump there in one fell swoop, that this is a process, but that if the person has this as a goal, we can certainly help them doing that. And we can still respond to wrongs with clarity and firmness without being caught up in this ourselves. So again, when we look at the traditional 12-step program, forgiveness has a lot of emphasis in terms of our own pain, steps 1, 4, 5, 8, and 9. Choosing higher power instead of our sneaky addictive mind, steps 2, 3, 6, 7, and 11. And get out of way and letting the higher power do the rest. For those individuals and I've met many, many, many individuals who have told me this in early stage work in treatment, that they are agnostic or atheist. And what I have said with them is, well, it's very interesting that you say that, because I think that even though you don't want to acknowledge it, all along you have had a higher power, and it's your drug or drugs of choice, because you have depended on your substance of choice to change you into something that you couldn't be on your own. And that certainly fits the definition of a higher power. Now all we're talking about is what higher power is going to work for you in your life, not whether you can believe in a higher power or not. Okay, so this was originally on your handouts, Healing Rainbow Journey. Rainbow Journey was too long for our presentation today. I'm going to throw that into the SUD conference next week, but we're going to do a quick piece on healing resentments here as a way of looking at forgiveness. So here we go.
Take just a moment to focus on your breathing, letting yourself be comfortable, noticing how you do not have to pull or push your breath. However, simply allow it to flow in and out, in and out. Allow your mind to wander for a moment to find a resentment that you have in regard to someone specific. This should not be hatred or intense rage. However, just a resentment that you're consciously aware, and that it would be helpful for you to change. Focus on this individual as if they were directly in front of you right now. And just be aware of how you experience them. Do they seem larger than you? Are they at eye level? Are they too close? Is there a particular expression on their face or tone of voice creating an undesired reaction for you? Allow yourself to recall the particular incident about which you feel resentful. And as you remember, just be aware of how you respond internally, how your breathing changes, if there's any tension or tightness anywhere, or if you notice any discomfort or pain. Be aware of that. Just recognize it. As you experience and observe your reaction, take a moment to reflect. How does this resentment impact you? What are the results of your resentment? How does keeping and maintaining this resentment affect your mental well-being, your physical body, your emotional self? And if you think in terms of long-term consequences, what impact do you anticipate to occur if you continue to carry this resentment? Then become aware of a couple of other factors. Notice in regard to the other person, how are you somehow tethered as a result of your resentment? Is there a physical connection, like a cord, or some other link that flows from you to them? Is it like Velcro, or more like an energy field? Again, what kind of connection do you notice? And just be aware of this. Now, become aware of an element within you that truly does not want to be free of this resentment. And just focus and notice, allowing yourself to be an impartial observer without commentary. just curious about the purpose, intent of this aspect of you, the aspect of you that insists on retaining your resentment. As you do this, sensing it, experiencing it, seeing it, feeling it, giving it permission to exist, just ask this aspect of you. What is your function? What is your positive intent? Does this relate to protection or safety? Is this about making sure that the action or attitude or behavior of the other person does not reoccur? What possible contribution does this aspect of you make in your overall life? And now just musing, just imagining how that same function could be accomplished in a gentler, more efficient, elegant way. That you could accomplish the same function by using another method to serve you, another strategy that would keep you safe, protected, well. Just notice in your physiology where you perceive that aspect of you doing this in a more efficient, elegant, ecological way, and align with that. Breathing into that space. Imagining that skill to be wholly present in your life. Yesterday, today, tomorrow. And in thinking about tomorrow, imagining the you who has already healed from this resentment, perceiving that future you in as much detail as possible as a three-dimensional holographic image in your immediate proximity right now. Take just a moment to imagine associated, fully stepping into this you, experiencing the you who has already released the resentment, and through their eyes, looking back at the current you, offering some encouragement, some support, some hope. And then stepping back into the you of today and looking back at the other and assessing your readiness with the security of this more ecological method to think about somehow severing the connection you experienced with the other. It could be as simple as cutting a cord, or dissolving a connection, or eliminating the binding of your past resentment. And if you're ready to proceed, just imagine as you release that past resentment, sever that prior connection, the way you were tethered to this other individual, that you could immediately connect this to your future self, one who's ready to protect you, to implement the skill, to assure you, to advocate for you. If you're not ready to do that, just imagine at some point in the future that you will be. And then gently and carefully allowing yourself to reorient to this time and place, refreshed, revitalized, relaxed. Okay.
Okay, so now we want to talk about compassion a little bit and the quivering of the heart in response to another's pain. So again, many traditions emphasize love, connecting to the empathy of acts of kindness. And the fear is that if we do that, we'll be taken advantage of, or that other people will become dependent on us, or that we'll be unable to handle the other person's distress. And well, I've certainly encountered folks who are even afraid of becoming abstinent and sober, you know? And so again, that what we need to look at is also that we have compassion with ourselves, you know, that one of the statements is, if your compassion doesn't include yourself, it's incomplete. So how do we get to the place where we're able to move away from being preoccupied with ourselves? In 12-step program, we talk about released from the bondage of self, and that we can ask to help other people, that they be blessed, that they be given what they need. Some of you may be familiar with the loving kindness meditation, which speaks to that. So again, self-compassion by acceptance, caring, and if we're feeling inadequate, remind ourselves that everybody has limitations. Again, a 12-step tradition, they often talk about comparing your insides to the other person's outsides and perceiving yourself as inferior there, and that understanding self with curiosity and acceptance instead of rejection or judgment. This was Anthony Ray Hinton, who we referenced earlier. So here he is saying, when no one believes a word you say, eventually you stop saying anything. I did not say good morning. I did not say good evening. I did not say how do you do to everyone. If the guards needed information from me, I wrote it down on a piece of paper. I was angry. But going into the 4th year, I heard a man in the cell next to me crying. The love and compassion I had received from my mother spoke through me, and I asked him what was wrong. He said he just found out that his mother had passed away. I told him, look at this way. Now you have someone in heaven who's going to argue your case before God. Then I told him a joke and he laughed. Suddenly my voice and my sense of humor were back. For 26 long years after that night, I tried to focus on other people's problems. And every day I did, I would get down to the end of the day and realized I had not focused on my own. How interesting. So compassion. Is it a challenge to feel compassion daily? In what context? Can your compassion be contagious? How does a lack of compassion manifest? And to understand that it maybe takes many, many years of mindfulness practice or being in a monastery to equal the spiritual growth generated by one sleepless night with a sick child. So if you're a parent, maybe you understand that, you know. If you're not a parent, maybe you've had a similar experience with a person or animal that you love dearly. And what does that like? And how does the experience of raising children inspire, test, and grow our compassion? And then loving kindness. So this is the antidote again for the poisons of jealousy, resentment, greed, and grief. Not wishing for more than we have, instead appreciating what's already there. Not chafing at the good fortune of others, or resenting or mourning what's past, lost, gone, or never had. It signifies embracing reality, and the desire for more can be boundless and endless. Think about marketers who always convince us to upgrade to the new iPhone, the new Android phone, the new TV, the new car, whatever it is, that there's always one more thing to want in our society. And that again, what we could do would be focusing on gratitude, which often involves exercising more often. People who exercise have fewer physical symptoms, feel better about life, positive, make progress towards important goals. How interesting it is with gratitude that one of the things in the 12-step program is that a grateful alcoholic is a sober alcoholic, you know. So building on humility practice, again, done daily, may be done at the end of the day to reflect on your intentions and practice. You can also practice with someone else 3 things for which you feel grateful, and to journal these things and to be able to find different things on a daily basis for which you feel gratitude. So how have you been able to notice moments of gratitude in the past? For you, what can gratitude be an antidote, and how do you presently practice that? When you're grateful, you're not fearful. When you're not fearful, you're not violent. When you're grateful, you act out of a sense of enough and not out of a sense of scarcity. You're willing to share. When you're grateful, you're enjoying a difference between people and respectful to all people. A grateful world is a world of joyful people. Grateful people are joyful people. A grateful world is a happy world. And I think we really, really, really need that one right now. Okay, this is an exercise on best self. Unfortunately, we're not going to have enough time to do that. So let me just describe to you how that works. Is that you have the person figure out some times in their life when they were at their apex in terms of, again, compassion, gratitude, kindness, forgiveness, acceptance, etc. This has been practiced in a number of treatment facilities, including adolescent treatment facilities. The research has been significant in terms of that it helps people connect to and integrate and ground themselves in their best self, and that carries over following their episode of treatment. So what are we talking about here in terms of establishing a curriculum for people in terms of mindfulness? That it needs to be informed by the theories and practices drawing from a wide range of material. It's underpinned by human experiences that addresses suffering and the pathways to alleviate it. It gives us a new relationship with experience, both in the moment, decentering, and how we approach things in life. It helps self-regulation, again, attention, emotional and behavioral, interpersonal qualities, and sustained intensive training, experiential inquiry-based learning, and exercises develop insight and understanding. The core curriculum that's described on the left here can be adapted to specific context and populations, and that the variation in program structure, length, duration is tailored again to fit the context and the population. So experience at least 2 mindfulness exercises. We did that. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to do the third one. My tendency to overplan. So watch your thoughts, they become words. Watch your words, they become actions. Watch your actions, they become habits. Watch your habits, they become character. Watch your character, it becomes your destiny. Again, here is my contact information, both email and my website that you can get a hold of me. And so I'd like to take a couple minutes now. Looks like we have maybe about 5 minutes to do some questions. And I saw people were posting a bunch of stuff. So if you want to fire a couple questions at me, go ahead.
All right, Tom. Yeah, we have a question. In what part of the recovery process is mindfulness most effective? The group I teach is only 5 weeks long.
Well, I would say 2 things with that. Part of what I'm going to talk about in the SUD presentation next week is how you can place it into withdrawal management, how you can place it in residential care, intensive outpatient, or outpatient. At the very minimum, what you could do would be to take 5 to 7 minutes at the beginning of the group to do a mindfulness exercise with folks, which could help them focus their attention and to even determine what it is that they actually need to talk about in that session. What I found, sometimes check-in ends up in some groups, which it shouldn't, taking 15 to 20 minutes and consuming too much of the group time. And by doing mindfulness at the beginning, you could certainly focus people down, because it's not really the issue. It's how they're coping with the issue. And again, by building the skills we've talked about today, that could make changes. I was the chief quality officer over a residential program in Grand Rapids. And I said to the counselors, if you teach people to deal with impulsivity and need for immediate gratification, and you don't respond to their every need in the 5 minutes they want you to, you're doing a significant part of your job in shaping them just by doing those things. Okay, do we have a couple more questions?
Another question is, can you recommend any apps that are good for practicing mindfulness?
I don't personally use any. I have heard that there is, I think Mindspace out there is one, and there are a couple other that are commercially available right now. So I would say if you just go on Google and Google that, there'll probably be several that'll pop up.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tom. Actually, there's one more. We'll go ahead and ask this question.
Okay.
Which mindful exercise do you personally like to share first with SUD clients, knowing that the initial reaction will be important?
Well, doing the 3-step breathing or healthy breathing space, but one I do very early on, and this is developed by a guy named Robert McDonald, MC capital DONALD, who is from Telos Healing Center in California, and he has this that you can get as a download. It's something that's called Healing Yes, Healing No. And what it anticipates is within each person, there's a part of them that wants to heal, and there's also a part of them that doesn't want to heal. And it takes them through a long meditation, which is 45 minutes, which you might have to break up, and then helps them integrate those two parts of themselves so that you're not dealing with a sabotaging healing no part throughout treatment itself. Okay.
Thanks, Tom. I'm going to go ahead and hop back on, and due to time, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. And again, Tom encourages everyone to go ahead, if you have more questions, to reach out to him with his contact information. And we appreciate that, Tom. Thanks for today. Thanks for your wonderful PowerPoint, all the videos and everything that you had to really add to the presentation. We appreciate it.
Thank you.